Lieutenant Chris Wilson got word from a friend while serving overseas that his wife was trying to sell all of their furniture. He asked for an early leave of absence as a surprise for his wife and children. Upon witnessing directly the living circumstances of his daughter, he validated his instincts. He felt something wasn't right. Throughout his deployment, Chris couldn't help but think about the wife he had left behind. His religion was the only thing that sustained him. A weird text from a buddy back home had left him unsure of what to do. He had to get his own confirmation. He arrived home 1 month early thanks to an early flight. If all went well, he planned to surprise his family by meeting them early. There will be a surprise waiting for Chris when he arrived home. He had no idea what problems awaited him. He had assumed that he would be the one to surprise his wife, but she had something hidden from him. It never occurred to him that it would have anything to do with his daughter. Chris hoped for a flawless reunion after using his key to open the front door. Rather, he found out that a large portion of their furniture was gone. That was not all there was to the story. Upon witnessing the state of affairs, he concluded that his prolonged absence from the nation was unwarranted. He was the kind of person who would watch Disney movies with his kid and attend family barbecues. He was such a good man. But he also had another family to think about. As a valued member of a demanding family, a lieutenant in the military had numerous responsibilities that privates did not. He had lengthy tours to service. Chris really missed his sweet wife. His own daughter was even born without him as a result of this. He really regretted that, but there was nothing he could do about it. Though Chris saw her very seldom, there was no doubt in his mind that his daughter knew and loved him completely. Was his wife able to comprehend him, though? Chris thought his wife realized that the country needed him after everything he had been through. All that remained was to hope it was real. Did she start selling furniture and keeping other sinister secrets since he was never going to be her husband? Chris would quickly find out that the military post provided financial assistance, allowing him to send the majority of his earnings home. He was committed to see to it that his family was taken care of. Even if he was unable to be at home all the time, although his wife had a career of her own, he realized that they would not be able to live comfortably without his support. It was his hope that it would suffice. Chris received a surprise after 3 months of being off active duty. He received a text from a friend back home. It was hard for Chris to try to stay in touch with all of his friends. It wasn't always easy to talk to his pals back home. So when he read the message from an old acquaintance, he wasn't sure what to believe. Chris left behind many kind individuals in his community when he went on service. He was always informed about Dallas, Texas, his hometown, by his close friend Kenny. The strangest aspect, though, was that he received a message expecting some local drama or an update on the weather. He couldn't believe it was about his wife, though. Kenny would often inform Chris on small matters as a means of staying in touch. Usually, it was the news from the area or Dallas's everyday sentiments. In between shifts, Chris read the note. There was no time to waste. Looking down at his phone, he needed to get home as quickly as possible and submit his leave request right now. An administrator would have to be contacted by him. It was troubling that his wife was participating in the messaging. Up until that point, Kenny had never spoken about his wife and had no need to. Chris was troubled by more than simply his wife's involvement. He asked for a leave of absence because of his suspicions raised by the message's content. The message said, "Chris, I just thought you should know your wife is selling your furniture." And Chris's eyes grew wide. What on earth was she doing with all of it? Alarm bells rung in his head. The issue was that his departure wasn't planned for another month. He had no choice but to smile and see what he might accomplish. Chris went to the administrative office of the Army base and asked for leave. He was optimistic that they would approve his request because of his excellent record. He would have to wait a day while the request was processed, though. He was totally preoccupied with what was going on at home. Did she want to tell him that she was planning to leave him? Chris was a perfectionist, all his positive qualities notwithstanding. He exaggerated the situation at home, though he wasn't usually at home. That night as he sat on his bunk, his mind raced, thinking what could go wrong while he waited for his request. Everything he cared about was housed there, thus it continued to play an important role in his life. But where would he even stay when he got back? While waiting for the results, Chris kept himself occupied with the routine activities on the base. The faculty members he had contacted via email responded to his leave request in the afternoon. He let himself a long breath of relief as he opened the email. His request for leave had been granted. Without hesitation, he booked a plane back to his hometown, and he couldn't have been happier to be returning. Even if his motivation wasn't entirely moral, he could only pray it was insignificant so he could be among his loved ones. While seated on the plane, he retrieved a photograph of his wife and little daughter. His joy knew no bounds, but upon his return, what would he discover? After his flight, Chris hopped in a cab and headed home. As he pulled onto the street adjacent to his house, a wave of unease washed over him. Perhaps the front lawn would have a "for sale" sign, or it would be completely wrecked. But he peered at the house he hadn't seen in 3 months closely as the taxi pulled up to the driveway. In his opinion, what does it mean? From the outside, Chris couldn't believe the house had remained unchanged since he had left it. He grew increasingly uneasy as he drew near the entrance. A chill ran up his spine as he approached, uncertain of what was beyond the front door. He turned the key in the lock. Upon entering the living area, Chris beheld the couch absent. A large portion of the additional furniture was also absent. He thereafter turned to ascend the stairs in order to inspect the bedroom. Their wife's presence was unexpected, while he anticipated their daughter's presence at school. Chris was about to stumble upon something that would give him the willies. He was thrust into an unimaginably difficult predicament all of a sudden. He was startled to hear his wife's voice from the bedroom, followed by the voice of a male. She certainly wasn't on her own. He began to wonder what had transpired with his life at that point. His lengthy deployments were out of his hands, but could she really pick someone else? Chris felt his anger building as he walked toward the entrance. Although he generally disliked confrontations, this one had finally gotten to him. A reaction he developed in the military caused him to kick open the door to his bedroom as he looked inside. There was no danger in the room he couldn't handle. Having said that, he did note that his wife was perfectly okay, perched on the corner bed. Chris beheld both his wife and an unknown individual. As he gazed at the tableau unfolding before him, he was at a loss for words. Paralyzed with fear, he did not move. What was happening was not totally obvious to him. His wife would need to provide a very convincing defense if she wanted to escape this one. Seeing him brought tears to her eyes. Upon entering the bedroom, Chris saw that the duvet and sheets were nowhere to be found. They had been bundled up as if to be transferred. Still, that wasn't everything. Accompanying his wife was a man dressed as a boiler suit. The source of the voice he had heard was immediately apparent to Chris, but what was this man's purpose in being here? Incredulous, Chris remained still by the entrance. This felt like a scene from one of those intense films he and his wife would occasionally watch together. This was completely new to him, and his wife, it appeared, was overjoyed to see him. With her eyes watering, she walked up to give him an embrace. Her actions necessitated an explanation. Chris felt some relief because it seemed like the man was there for work. But what was going on? Chris needed some answers to some questions. His wife advised him to have a private conversation in the kitchen, but he persisted in trying to coax them out of her. That was her first blunder. Chris knew before he could respond. He couldn't help but sneak a peek at his daughter's bedroom as he descended the stairs. His wrath erupted once more. What he saw was deeply upsetting. Instead of his daughter's bed, there were a few of pillows on the floor. The princess slept on the floor, didn't she? What on earth was going on here? Chris barged into the kitchen and immediately wanted to know what was happening. Nothing, not even his daughter's bed, was located. For what reason did she choose to sleep on the floor? While gazing at the kitchen floor, his wife assured him, "Well, you shouldn't be concerned about her dozing off there. What gives her the right to say that?" The worst imaginable outcome sprang into Chris's head out of nowhere. This might have been their departure. If so, the man who had been carrying their beds and furniture downstairs from upstairs could have explained his actions. While he was away on duty, were his wife and daughter quietly relocating? He whispered to her, "What's going on?" Despite the fact that he was wounded in the service. More than anything else, what she was going to say would shatter his heart. While Chris braced himself for her explanation, the previous man descended the stairs with the bed and informed Chris's wife that it was ready to go. While Chris was still in the process of trying to uncover the truth, a revelation struck him. He volunteered to assist the stranger in loading the mattress onto the outside parked van. This would be the military man's way of getting information so he would know what he was up against, under the false pretext that he would assist the stranger in loading the bed into the van. Chris was right behind him as he hauled the bed out the door. Chris wondered what he should do next as he helped the man. He instantly had the idea. He would improvise. He intended to ask the man a serious question out of earshot of his wife, after placing the mattress in the van's rear. Chris turned to face the man and removed his wallet. He gave a nice smile, a gleam in his eye, appreciating the man's help. He took out a $10 cash and gave it to him. "Where are you going with this thing, anyway?" he inquired in a nonchalant manner. The guy, momentarily confused, walked right into Chris's trap. In response, the man said, "Well, to my house, of course." Chris was the one who was perplexed now. Although he possessed further information, it appeared to have backfired on him. Why would his spouse give their furniture to an unknown person? Did Chris not even comprehend how closely they were connected? Now more than ever, he was perplexed. Though Chris's quiet trick hadn't gone quite as he had hoped, he was ready to be far more forthright with the stranger this time. He made the decision to ask the man directly how he knew Chris's wife and the specifics of the situation. The stranger's eyes narrowed defensively, but he continued to explain, "I don't know what you mean." But would Chris be satisfied with that? "For months now, my wife has been whining about our furniture. Your wife was selling these things for a decent price, so I got them from her," the unfamiliar person continued. Chris immediately grasped the explanation and the situation began to make more sense. Though he was happy that it wasn't what he had first thought, there was still a very important question. Chris stood there in the driveway for a long while, sorting through all the ideas running through his mind. He was thinking over all the information he had found thus far. Why would his spouse need to sell their furnishings? Now he was prepared to face her head-on, and she was inside waiting for him, prepared to respond to his inquiries. However, he found it inconceivable that she would make their daughter sleep on the hard floor. Chris saw his wife was still waiting for him in the kitchen when he returned inside. She appeared unhappy as she gazed blankly at the ground. Her reaction merely piqued his interest in the circumstances. He felt it was time to tell her the truth as he sat down by her side. He posed his urgent query to her. Chris gathered his courage and said, "I talked to the stranger when we were outside." Turning to face his wife, "You were selling him our furnishings," he added. "What kind of parent could let our daughter sleep on the floor?" She then broke down unexpectedly, tears pouring down her face. It must be far more serious than he had ever imagined. He knew at that very instant. His wife, in a somber tone, stated that it was because of money issues. Perplexed, Chris inquired as to her meaning. He was unable to understand the circumstances. The woman completely lost it and revealed everything. Chris hadn't known what was going on for 3 long months, but his wife was going to let him know, "Due to my pay being cut, we had to scale back a few things to afford groceries, water, and electricity," she revealed at last. Chris found it too ridiculous to believe. Their financial status would prevent them from moving away. He had failed to provide for his family, so his daughter was forced to sleep on the floor. He could now understand why she had held off on telling him earlier. She was equally as proud of her career as he was. Chris felt his heart shatter. He was unaware that things had become worse this quickly. He was aware that he had to come up with a plan. He was the head of the household, therefore it was incomprehensible that he would let his wife and daughter sleep on the floor while he was deployed in the military. Subsequently, he recalled an event from a few months prior. There existed a chance associated with his employment that might prove to be the family's deliverance. Chris thought about it for a while before coming up with a solution, assuring her that they wouldn't have to sleep on the floor any longer. He promised to come up with a solution. Actually, he had already thought out his idea, in an attempt to make it a memorable occasion, possibly with a fancy meal and a bottle of champagne. He had been keeping it a secret, however. He was now compelled to divulge the startling information he had been hiding, similar to his wife's circumstances. Chris's workplace has undergone changes. It didn't seem right to be angry with her for keeping her news to himself when he had also kept it a secret. Fortunately, his would not be quite as catastrophic as hers. It would just be a simple reorganization of the hierarchy. But would it be sufficient to save them from this difficult predicament as he had hoped? His wife was aware that Chris was serving in the military, but she was unaware of the specifics of his position. The inaccurate portrayal of troops served no useful purpose. At this point, he had to clarify how the new advances at work could end up being their salvation. To be more precise, his role would need to be defined. Before his recent promotion, Chris served as a lieutenant, but just recently, an exercise failure shown that he was unfit for that level. After the tragic training accident, Chris was just found unsuitable to continue as a lieutenant, and he was afraid to tell his wife the truth. When he couldn't come up with a suitable manner to tell her, he ultimately decided to be forthright and tell her the truth. My title has changed from lieutenant, honey. A few months back, there was a serious incident that occurred while exercising. Allow me to elucidate. Continuing, Chris informed her of the way he averted a potentially disastrous scenario. A soldier who had just joined the army was unable to detonate a grenade after pulling its pin, given that Chris was in charge of the newbie. He felt obligated to take care of the problem. Consequently, he sprang for the explosive device that had fallen within feet of them. Subsequently, he flung it as far as he could in the direction of the explosive range. Chris was quickly approached by the major of the military base after he saw the entire incident. Something about the major's stride seemed strange to Chris, who was bracing himself for the worst possible rebuke. Unexpectedly, the major vowed not to penalize Chris and praised him for his bravery. Actually, the major's original intention was to suggest Chris for a promotion. He was promised a promotion and a salary increase. He intended to talk to his wife before he made a final choice. It was now clear what to do. With his daughter back in bed, he could put his family's finances in order. Chris had already arranged for new beds for the whole family before she got home from school. Seeing her dad made her quite happy. To put it mildly, his daughter had been taken aback when she saw him at home. Her joy at finally seeing her father after all these months was overwhelming. Yet, the joy was short-lived. How has everything been since I left, sweetheart? Chris spoke to his daughter. Her happy tears quickly turned melancholy as the beam of sunshine's grin faded. Their difficulties had clearly been more challenging than Chris had anticipated. Although Mommy assured me that things will improve soon, Daddy, I must admit that it hasn't been easy. It's great to have you back. Chris was heartbroken that his daughter had to go through what any child should go through, but he also knew that his wife had done all she could. Another surprise awaited his daughter from him. He couldn't help but imagine how exhausted she must have been after sleeping on the floor, but all she cared about was having her dad back home. However, a surprise gift she hadn't anticipated will shortly arrive. I agree with Mommy. It will all be all right, Chris assured her. Whatever he had said to her, he had meant it completely. Unfortunately, the unsavory remarks eventually came out. All right, then I may get my bed again. I won't get punished by my mommy anymore. A knot formed in Chris's gut. Her meaning was completely lost on me. Thinking about all the times he had been gone from home set his thoughts racing. Was his wife behaving in a way that he would have found unacceptable toward their daughter? He needed to know immediately what his daughter had done to deserve this punishment. Carefully, he questioned, "What do you mean, punish you, sweetheart?" However, being so forthright was incorrect. In an instant, his daughter froze and began to withdraw. "I don't understand, my darling. Why was Mommy scolding you?" Chris smiled and spoke softly to clarify his query, but all she said in return was a low moan, saying, "I'm not meant to tell," she continued. Panic began to consume Chris the moment he heard that. The thought that their child might be in danger was the worst thing that could happen to a parent, particularly if the other parent was involved. Chris knew he had to devise a solid strategy if he wanted to learn his daughter's situation. He had to be kind with her, else she would run away and lie. But she might not see the point in opening up to him if he was overly gentle. He needed to strike the ideal compromise. Fortunately, he knew how to manage dangerous circumstances because to his time in the military, this appeared to be the most critical circumstance he had ever encountered. Even though he had defused explosive devices and saved fellow soldiers while under enemy fire, he cared deeply about this, and it was having an impact on the people he cared about. His kid was too precious to him to risk. Therefore he had to find out what was going on without delay. Then Chris had an idea for a possible strategy. He may make a deal with his daughter. "Sweetie, if you let me know why Mommy was punishing you, I bet I could convince her to stop," he said. His daughter smiled as they locked eyes. "Okay," he requested his young daughter to tell him the entire tale. "Well, The removal of my bed was the first thing that happened," she whispered softly, adjusting her weight. "Mommy told me she was punishing me. I did something I shouldn't have. And Mommy said she didn't want you to know." Chris scowled. Secrets did not sit well with him. "Can you tell me what you did, sweetie?" He knew he was coming closer to the real thing. What his daughter told him next caught Chris off guard. "Mom and I devised a system of rewards and penalties when it came time to do my assignment. I neglected to do it. She called me naughty and threatened to take away one of my toys if I continued to ignore my homework assignments. However, every Friday I would receive a treat if I behaved well," she concluded, flashing a bright smile while sharing her accomplishments. Chris felt a surge of relief. He had been about to blow up over something so insignificant. He trusted his wife's decision to reprimand their daughter, but he wished she had informed him of the situation. He realized that she probably hadn't told him because she didn't want to add to his stress. Now that the enigma had been solved, he knelt beside his daughter and took his phone. "Do you want to see what I got you, sweetheart?" Chris grinned and held up a picture from his phone to her. The pink princess bed had the most comfortable mattress he'd ever seen. As long as her father was living, his little child would never sleep on the floor again. After watching the story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.